They told me I wasn't mentioned in the will, my own sons, standing in front of the empty chair like guards at a gate I had no right to pass. I stood in the doorway of Attorney Bernard's conference room, 70 years old, my sister Marlene 3 days in the ground, and Randall, my eldest, looked at me as though I were a stranger who'd wandered into the wrong funeral. Mum. His voice was flat, professional, the voice he used with difficult clients at his firm. There's been a mistake. You don't need to be here. Trevor stood beside him, younger by 4 years, softer around the edges, but saying nothing, just looking at his shoes. Italian leather, I noticed, new. The chair they blocked was the one at the head of the table, the one where Marlene used to sit during family dinners in this very office building she'd owned for 30 years. Back when family dinners still happened, back when I was still invited. I'm her sister, I said. My voice came out smaller than I intended, and I hated that. Hated the way my hands trembled slightly as I gripped my purse. Black leather, 20 years old, the strap starting to fray. I'd carried it to my husband Robert's funeral, to my daughter Caroline's wedding before the cancer took her, to Marlene's bedside those last terrible weeks. We know who you are. Randall shifted his weight, and I saw the envelope in his hand, cream-coloured, expensive paper. But Aunt Marlene was very clear about her wishes. The will she had drawn up last month leaves everything to her nephews, to us. Last month. Marlene had been on oxygen last month, could barely whisper. I'd been there every afternoon, spooning broth into her mouth, reading her the mystery novels she loved, holding her hand through the morphine dreams. That's not possible, I said. It's right here. Trevor finally spoke, his voice apologetic, but his feet still planted. Attorney Bernard has the document. Dated, witnessed, notarized, everything legal. My heart was doing something strange in my chest. A flutter, then a squeeze, then a flutter again. The pills Dr. Martinez had given me were in my purse, but I wouldn't take them. Not here, not in front of them. I thought about the house, Marlene's beautiful craftsman on Sycamore Street, with the wraparound porch and the garden where we'd planted roses together every spring for 40 years. The house where we'd grown up, where our mother had taught us to can peaches, and our father had built us a treehouse that still stood, weathered and grey, in the backyard. I thought about the investment accounts Marlene had mentioned, vaguely, when she could still talk. The retirement funds, the life insurance. I thought about how I'd sold my own small condo 2 years ago to pay for Caroline's medical bills, how I'd been living in a rented efficiency above the pharmacy on Main Street ever since, how the lease was month to month and the landlord had already hinted about raising the rent. I need to sit down, I said. Randall didn't move. Mum, you should go home. We'll handle this. It's going to be complicated, probate and taxes and…" I said I need to sit down. Something in my voice must have surprised him, because he stepped aside. Just barely. Just enough. I walked to the chair, not the head of the table, but the one beside it, and lowered myself into it. The leather was cold through my dress. Navy blue, the one I'd worn to Marlene's service, the one I'd worn to Robert's service, the only dress I owned anymore. That was appropriate for death. Attorney Bernard came in then, a small man with wire-rimmed glasses and a gentle manner that had always seemed at odds with the ruthless efficiency of his legal practice. He'd handled Marlene's business affairs for decades. He'd handled Robert's will too, back when there was something to will besides debt and my wedding ring. "Mrs. Hayes." He nodded to me, not unkindly. "I wasn't expecting you. My sons seem to think I'm not mentioned in my sister's will." He glanced at Randall, then at the envelope on the table. "The document I have indicates that the estate passes to her nephews, yes. I apologize for any confusion." The room tilted slightly. I gripped the edge of the table. "That's wrong," I said. The words felt thick in my mouth, hard to push out. Marlene and I had an agreement, a legal agreement, Mum. Randall's hand on my shoulder, heavy and patronizing. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Aunt Marlene made her choice. Maybe she felt closer to us. Maybe we had a mutual will." I looked at Attorney Bernard. In 2008, after Robert died and Marlene's husband George passed, we went to a lawyer together. We made it official. Everything to each other as the surviving sister. Everything. Attorney Bernard's expression changed, just slightly, a tightening around his eyes. "A mutual will," he repeated slowly. "Yes." I opened my purse with shaking hands. The clasp stuck the way it always did, and I had to work it twice before it gave. Inside was the envelope I'd retrieved from my safe deposit box that morning, the one I'd almost forgotten about until the bank teller had handed me the metal box and I'd seen it there, beneath Robert's death certificate and Caroline's birth certificate and the deed. To the condo I no longer owned. I'd read it last night, 3 times. In the dim light of my efficiency apartment, sitting on the second-hand sofa that smelled faintly of someone else's cigarettes, I'd read every word. The envelope was old. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges. And there was a coffee ring on one corner from some long-ago morning. But the document inside was pristine, protected by the plastic sleeve I'd slipped it into all those years ago, when such things still seemed important, when the future still felt like something I could plan for. I slid it across the table to Attorney Bernard. Randall leaned forward. "What is that?" "Our agreement." I kept my eyes on the attorney. "Marlene and I went to Samuel Chen's office on Oak Street, May 14th, 2008. We'd just buried her husband. George had left her comfortable, and I had. A little from Robert's life insurance, before the medical bills. We wanted to make sure that when one of us went, the other would be taken care of. No confusion, no complications. Mr. Chen retired 5 years ago, Attorney Bernard said, but he was reading the document. I could see his eyes moving across the lines, could see the way his fingers smoothed the edges of the paper with professional care. The document should still be valid. My voice was stronger now, steadier. The flutter in my chest had quieted. A will doesn't expire just because the lawyer who drafted it retires. Mom, this is ridiculous. Randall's face was flushed. Even if you did have some old will, Aunt Marlene clearly changed her mind. She had the right to change her mind, not under the terms of a mutual will. Attorney Bernard spoke quietly, still reading. A mutual will, if properly executed, owning partry cor inspecting, cutes a binding contract between parties. If both parties agreed not to revoke or modify the terms without mutual consent, and one party has passed away, the surviving party generally cannot be disinherited through a subsequent will created without their knowledge or agreement. The room went very quiet. Trevor had gone pale. Randall's flush deepened to something darker. You're saying this piece of paper overrides Aunt Marlene's most recent wishes? Randall's voice had an edge now, sharp, angry. I'm saying I need to review this carefully. Attorney Bernard looked at me over his glasses. Mrs. Hayes, do you have any other documentation, correspondence between you and your sister regarding this agreement? Any modifications or discussions about changing the terms? I thought about the letters, the birthday cards Marlene had sent every year, always with a note. The Christmas cards with the photograph of her house, the same photograph every year because she loved that house more than anything. The envelope of cards I'd saved, tied with string, sitting in a shoebox in my efficiency closet. I thought about the conversations. Sitting on her porch last summer, watching the roses bloom. Marlene had been tired that day, moving slowly, but her mind was sharp. When I go, May, the house is yours. You know that. You'll take care of it. You'll take care of the roses. I'd laughed. You'll outlive me, Marlene. You're tougher than old leather. But she'd gripped my hand, her fingers thin and papery, but strong. Promise me. Promise you won't. Let anyone take it from you. It's ours. Mama's and Daddy's and ours. It should stay ours. I have letters, I said, cards. She mentioned the house, our agreement. She never said anything about changing it. This is insane. Randall pushed back from the table. You're going to let her come? In here with some ancient document and Mr. Brennan. Attorney Bernard's voice was cold. I suggest you sit down. If this mutual will is valid, and if Mrs. Marlene Davies did not properly revoke it before creating a subsequent will, then your aunt's estate may very well pass entirely to Mrs. Hayes's. The meeting lasted another 40 minutes, but I remember it in fragments. Randall's lawyer voice, cold and technical, demanding verification and proof. Trevor's silence, his face turned toward the window. Attorney Bernard's careful questions, his equally careful answers. I sat in that chair and felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I felt present, visible, real. Not a function, not a role, not the woman who brought soup and ran errands and was expected to disappear quietly when her usefulness ended. A person with rights, with claims, with a voice that mattered. When it was over, Attorney Bernard kept the mutual will. I'll need to verify everything with Mr. Chen's old files, if they still exist. Contact the witnesses listed here. Review the state laws regarding mutual wills and their irrevocability. This will take some time, Mrs. Hayes. How much time? Randall demanded. A few weeks, perhaps longer, depending on what I find. And in the meantime, the estate remains frozen. No distributions, no access to accounts or property. Nothing happens until we determine which will is legally binding. I stood to leave, and my legs were steadier than I'd expected. The flutter in my chest was gone. I felt tired, bone-deep tired, but not weak. There was a difference I was only beginning to understand. Outside in the parking lot, Randall caught up with me. Mum, wait. I stopped beside my car. It was 15 years old, the Honda Civic I'd bought used after Robert died. The paint was fading. There was a dent in the rear bumper from where I'd backed into a post at the grocery store. But it ran, and the payments were done, and it was mine. You can't do this, Randall said. I looked at him, really looked at him. 6 feet, tall, broad-shouldered, successful in the way Robert had always wanted to be. Partner at a downtown law firm. Big house in the suburbs. 2 kids in private school. A wife who'd stopped speaking to me years ago after I'd missed 1 too many school plays because I was caring for Caroline. When had he gotten so old? When had the lines appeared around his eyes, the grey at his temples? When had I become invisible to him? Can't do what? I asked. Contest this, fight us. Aunt Marlene wanted us to have the estate. She told me. Last month when I visited. You visited her last month? The words came out sharper than I intended. I was there every day, Randall. Every single day. When did you visit? He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I was busy. Work was. When? Once. I visited once. She called me, said she needed to see me. We talked about the estate, about making sure things were in order. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What did you talk about? She wanted to make sure we'd be taken care of, Trevor and me. She knew you were managing, that you had your apartment, your routine. She wanted to help us with the kids' education. with Trevor's business expenses. Trevor's business expenses. I repeated the words slowly. The business that failed 2 years ago? The one where he lost all his investors' money? Randall's jaw tightened. That wasn't his fault. And the education funds for children who already attend schools that cost more than I live on in a year? That's not the point. Then what is the point, Randall? He looked away, toward the office building, toward anywhere but at me. The point is that Aunt Marlene made a choice. She had the right to change her mind. You had your time with Robert's money. This is our turn. Robert's money. There hadn't been any money. Not after the cancer, the experimental treatments that insurance wouldn't cover, the specialists in Houston and Boston and San Diego. Not after selling our house to pay the medical bills, after maxing out credit cards and taking loans against Robert's life insurance. Not after burying him with just enough left over to keep myself fed for a few months while I figured out how to start over at 62. But Randall didn't know that. I'd never told him, never burdened him with the details of how his father had died or what it had cost. I'd been protecting him, I realized, protecting both of them from the ugliness of it. And somehow, in all that protecting, I'd taught them that I didn't matter. I'm not fighting you, I said quietly. I'm claiming what's mine. What Marlene and I agreed to, what we planned for. With a piece of paper from 15 years ago that she obviously forgot about. She didn't forget. I opened my car door. She reminded me about it last summer on her porch. She told me the house would be mine. She was probably confused. She was sick. She was sharp as ever. I slid into the driver's seat. The vinyl was cracked, hot from the sun. Sharper than you, apparently, if you thought you could present a will written last month when she couldn't even sign her own name without help. I saw it in his face then, the knowledge that I knew, that I'd been there, that I'd seen how weak she'd become, how her hand shook when she tried to hold a pen. The witnesses, he started, were they there? In her room? Did they watch her sign, or did someone sign for her? This is ridiculous. But his voice had lost its certainty. I started the car. The engine coughed once, then caught. Goodbye, Randall. I drove away and I didn't look back. The efficiency apartment felt smaller when I got home. One room with a kitchenette, a bathroom with a shower that dripped, a window that looked out over the alley behind the pharmacy. 70 years old, and this was what I'd been reduced to. But it was mine. The lease was in my name. The furniture was mine, bought piece by piece from thrift stores and yard sales. The dishes were mine, mismatched but clean. Nobody could take it from me. I made tea, Earl Grey, the cheap kind from the grocery store, not the loose leaf Marlene had always kept in her kitchen. I sat on the sofa and drank it slowly, letting the heat warm my hands, and thought about what happened next. Attorney Bernard would investigate. He'd find the files from Samuel Chen's office, or he wouldn't. He'd track down the witnesses, or he wouldn't. He'd determine that the mutual will was valid, or he wouldn't. And if he didn't, I would lose everything. Not just the house, not just the money, but the last connection to Marlene, to our parents, to the life we'd built together over 7 decades of sisterhood. The phone rang. I almost didn't answer. It was late afternoon, and I was tired, and I didn't want to hear Randall's voice again, or Trevor's excuses, or anyone else's opinions about what I deserved. But it might be Attorney Bernard. It might be news. I picked up. May, it's Claire. My breath caught. Claire, Marlene's neighbour, the woman who'd brought us casseroles when George died, and had checked on Marlene every day when I couldn't be. There, 45 years old, kind-faced, with 3 teenagers and a husband who worked nights. Claire, hi. I heard about the will. Her voice was gentle. Randall called me, asked if I'd witnessed anything with Marlene last month. Any conversations about changing her estate plans. My hand tightened on the phone. What did you tell him? The truth, that I never saw Marlene sign anything, that the last time I saw her write her own name was back in June, before the stroke. The stroke, the one that had left Marlene's right side weak, her hand trembling, the one that had made her frustrated and angry because she'd always been so capable, so strong. Thank you, I whispered. May, listen, I don't know what's going on with your boys, but Marlene talked about you all the time, about how you were the only one who showed up, the only one who cared. That's not, she said you gave up everything for them, for Randall and Trevor and Caroline, that you sold your home for Caroline's treatments, that you never asked them for a thing in return. I closed my eyes. The tears came unexpectedly, hot and fast. I hadn't cried at the funeral, hadn't. Cried when I'd found Marlene cold in her bed that morning, her mystery novel still open on her chest. Hadn't cried through any of it. But now, sitting alone in my efficiency apartment, with Claire's voice warm in my ear, I cried. She wanted you to have the house, Claire said. She told me that, more than once. Said it was the only thing she could give you after everything you'd given everyone else. We talked for a while longer. About Marlene, about the roses in the garden, about the treehouse that still stood in the backyard. When I hung up, the apartment didn't feel quite so small anymore. I pulled out the shoebox of cards and letters, sat on the floor because there wasn't room on the sofa, and went through them one by one. Marlene's handwriting, looping and elegant even in her final years. Birthday wishes, holiday greetings, and notes. So many notes. The roses are beautiful this year. Thinking of you. Remember when we climbed that treehouse in the rain and Mama scolded us for an hour? Good times. The house is so quiet without you. Come visit soon. And then dated last 4th of July, 3 months before she died. May, when I'm gone, this is all yours. The house, the garden, everything. Don't let anyone tell you different. We made a promise. I'm keeping mine, you keep yours. Love, M. I photographed every card, every letter, uploaded them to my email, backed them up on the cloud. Storage. Trevor had helped me set up years ago, back when he still called me Mom instead of avoiding my eyes. Then I called Attorney Bernard. Mrs. Hayes, I wasn't expecting to hear from you until... I have documentation, I said. Letters from Marlene, cards, references to our agreement, to the house being mine. I'm sending them to you now. A pause, then, that would be helpful, yes. And I need to ask you something. Go ahead. If the mutual will is valid, what happens to the will Randall presented, the one from last month? If I determine that the mutual will was never properly revoked, then the subsequent will is void. It has no legal effect. And if someone forged Marlene's signature on that will... Another pause, longer this time. That would be a serious matter, potentially criminal. I'm not asking you to investigate that. I'm asking what happens to the estate in the meantime. The estate remains frozen until we resolve the conflict. No one accesses anything, no one benefits. Not until we have legal clarity. How long? I've already reached out to Samuel Chen. He's retired to Arizona, but he kept meticulous records. He's searching for his copy of Your Mutual Will. If he finds it, that corroborates your claim significantly. And if he doesn't, then we rely on the copy you provided, the witness statements I can gather, and the legal principle that mutual wills, once executed, create binding contracts that can't be unilaterally revoked. I thanked him and hung up. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the narrow bed in my efficiency apartment and listened to the sounds of the building. Footsteps above me, music through the wall, the drip of the shower, steady as a heartbeat. I thought about Marlene's house, the creaking floorboards in the hallway, the way sunlight came through the kitchen window in the mornings, golden and warm. The guest room where I'd stayed after Robert died, where Marlene had brought me tea and toast and sat with me while I cried. I thought about the garden, the roses we'd planted together, pink and red and yellow, the herbs by the back door, the bird bath where cardinals came every morning. I thought about my sons, about the moment I'd become invisible to them. Had it been gradual, or had there been a specific day, a specific choice when I'd ceased to be a person and become just a burden to be managed? The next morning I woke to sunlight streaming through my thin curtains and the sound of delivery trucks in the alley. My back ached from the old mattress. My hands were stiff, the arthritis worse in the mornings lately. But I got up. I made coffee. I took my pills, the ones for my heart and the ones for my blood pressure and the ones for the pain that never quite went away. And I decided something. I decided that I was done disappearing. Whatever happened with the will, whatever Attorney Bernard discovered, whatever Randall and Trevor did next, I would not make myself small anymore. I would not apologize for existing. I would not pretend that dignity was selfish. I thought about Marlene's words, written in her elegant script on that 4th of July card. Don't let anyone tell you different. I wouldn't. 3 weeks passed. Attorney Bernard called twice with updates. Samuel Chen had found his files. The mutual will was there, signed and witnessed, everything in order. He was sending certified copies. The witnesses from 2008 had been tracked down. One had moved to Florida but remembered the signing clearly. The other had passed away, but her daughter confirmed that her mother had worked as a paralegal in Mr. Chen's office and had mentioned the Davis sisters' mutual will in her journals. Everything pointed toward the mutual will being valid. Everything pointed toward me being Marlene's sole heir. And then Randall hired a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, Marcus Webb, the same attorney who'd helped Trevor's business during the bankruptcy proceedings, the one who specialized in challenging wills, in finding loopholes, in making problems expensive and complicated. The letter came on a Thursday. Thick envelope, law firm letterhead, formal language that boiled. Down to one thing. They were contesting the mutual will on the grounds that Marlene had been mentally incompetent when she signed it. I read the letter twice, standing in my kitchenette with my coffee growing cold. Then I called Attorney Bernard. I got the letter, I said. As did I. Mrs. Hayes, I want you to understand something. This is a common tactic. When someone can't win on the merits, they attack the person who made the will. They claim incompetence, undue influence, fraud. It's rarely successful, but it can drag out the process. How long? Months, possibly a year, or more if they appeal. A year. I looked around my efficiency apartment, at the second-hand furniture, at the bills piled on the counter, at the notice from my landlord about the rent increase effective next month. What do we need to prove she was competent? Medical records showing mental clarity, testimony from people who interacted with her regularly, documentation of her ability to handle her own affairs around the time the will was signed. I thought about 2008. Marlene had been 62, sharp as ever, managing her real estate holdings and her investments with the same fierce intelligence she'd applied to everything in her life. I'll get the records, I said. There's one more thing. Attorney Bernard's voice was careful. Mr. Webb has requested a deposition. He wants to question you under oath about your relationship with your sister, about the circumstances surrounding the mutual will, about whether you exerted any pressure on her to sign. Pressure? I didn't even know. But they're going to argue that you did, that you manipulated her, took advantage of her trust. It's part of the strategy. I felt the old flutter start in my chest, the fear, the urge to back down, to apologize, to make myself small enough that the conflict would go away. Then I thought about Marlene on her porch, about her grip on my hand. Promise me you won't let anyone take it from you. When? I asked. When what? When is the deposition? 2 weeks from Monday at Mr. Webb's. Office downtown. I'll be with you, of course, but Mrs. Hayes, this is going to be difficult. They're going to ask invasive questions. They're going to try to shake your story. Let them try, I said, and was surprised by the steadiness in my voice. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Attorney Bernard sent me a list of likely questions. We practiced answers. I gathered documentation, medical records showing Marlene's competence, bank statements proving she'd managed her own finances, letters demonstrating her clarity of thought. I found her journals. They were in a box in the back of her closet, discovered when Claire helped me retrieve some items from the house before it was sealed by the court. 5 years of daily entries, right up until the week before she died. I read them all, every word, and what I found was Marlene's voice, clear, rational, occasionally frustrated with her body's decline, but never confused about her wishes. Entries about me, about our friendship, about her disappointment in Randall and Trevor. May came today. She's the only one who remembers the roses need deadheading. Trevor called, asking for money again. I said no. He didn't like that. Haven't heard from him in 3 weeks. Randall stopped by, stayed 10 minutes, spent most of it checking his phone. I wonder if he even sees me anymore. And then, dated 2 months before she died. Talked to May about the house today. She tried to refuse, said I should leave it to the boys. I told her, no, they don't deserve it. They don't even want it. They want the money. May wants to keep the roses alive. That's worth more than money. I photocopied every relevant page, highlighted the passages about her mental state, her wishes, her relationship with me and with her nephews. When the deposition day came, I dressed carefully. The navy dress again, because it was the only one I had. But I added Marlene's pearls, the ones she'd given me last Christmas, for special occasions, she'd said, and this was certainly that. The law office was downtown, all glass and chrome and expensive art. Randall was already there when I arrived, sitting in the lobby with Trevor beside him. They both looked up when I came in. Trevor's eyes met mine, and I saw something there. Shame, maybe, or regret, but he didn't speak. Randall just stared at his phone. The deposition room was small and windowless. Marcus Webb sat across from me, a camera recording everything, a court reporter's fingers flying over the stenotype machine. Attorney Bernard sat beside me. Under the table, he touched my hand briefly, a steadying pressure. Mrs. Hayes. Webb's voice was professionally pleasant. "Thank you for being here today." I nodded. "I'd like to start by asking about your financial situation in 2008, when you and your sister executed the mutual will." "My financial situation was stable," I said. "I had some life insurance money from my husband's death, Social Security, a modest pension from his years with the Postal Service." "How much exactly?" Attorney Bernard leaned forward. "I don't see how that's relevant." "It's relevant," Webb said smoothly, "because we need to establish whether Mrs. Hayes had any financial motive for influencing her sister." I felt heat rise in my face. I didn't influence anyone. "Just answer the question, please." "How much money did you have in 2008? I told him. The exact amounts. The life insurance that had been eaten away by medical bills. The Social Security that barely covered rent. The pension that was enough for groceries and utilities, nothing more. And your sister's estate at that time was worth approximately $3 million, is that correct?" "I don't know. We didn't talk about money." "But you knew she was wealthy." "I knew she was comfortable, she owned property, she'd invested well. And you, by comparison, were struggling financially." "I was managing. Webb made a note. "Did you ever ask your sister for money?" "No." "Never? Not once in all those years?" I thought about the times I'd wanted to, the months after Caroline died when I could barely afford food, the winter when my car broke down and I'd walked 2 miles to the grocery store in the snow because I couldn't afford the repair. The doctor's bills I'd let go to collections because there was no other choice. "Never," I said firmly. Marlene offered. Many times. I always refused. Why? Because I didn't want to be a burden. Or because you had a longer game in mind? An inheritance that would be worth far more than any loan. Attorney Bernard stood. "That's inflammatory and unsubstantiated. Mr. Webb, if you continue this line of I'll rephrase." Webb smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Hayes, did you ever discuss with your sister the possibility of inheriting her estate?" "We discussed the mutual will. We both agreed that when one of us died, the other should have everything. It made sense. We were sisters. We were close. We wanted to protect each other." "Protect each other from what?" I looked at Randall, sitting against the wall behind Webb. He was watching. Me now, his face expressionless. "From being alone," I said quietly. "From being forgotten. From ending up with nothing after a lifetime of caring for everyone else." The deposition lasted 3 hours. Webb asked about every conversation I'd ever had with Marlene, every visit, every card I'd sent, every moment we'd spent together in the months and years leading up to her death. He asked about the day we'd signed the mutual will, what we'd discussed, who had brought it up first, whether Samuel Chen had explained all the terms clearly. He asked about Marlene's health in 2008, whether she'd been on any medications, whether she'd shown any signs of confusion or memory loss. He asked about my relationship with my sons, about Caroline, about Robert, about every loss and grief and hardship I'd ever endured. And through it all, I answered honestly, clearly, with the same measured dignity that Marlene had shown her whole life. When it was over, Attorney Bernard walked me to my car. "You did well," he said. I felt hollowed out, exhausted. What happens now? We wait for their medical expert to review the records. We prepare our response. We gather our own expert testimony about your sister's competence. Bernard, I looked at him. Be honest with me. What are our chances? He was quiet for a moment. Then, the law is on our side. The evidence is on our side. But litigation is expensive, and Mr. Webb knows that. He's counting on you not being able to afford a prolonged fight. How much? The question came out smaller than I intended. By the time this is resolved, 20,000, possibly more. $20,000. I had 3,000 in savings. Maybe. He must have seen it in my face because he touched my arm gently. Mrs. Hayes, I believe your sister's wishes were clear. I believe she wanted you to have her estate, and I'm willing to work with you on payment terms. We'll get through this. I drove home in a daze, parked in the alley behind the pharmacy, climbed the stairs to my efficiency apartment, and found Trevor waiting outside my door. He stood when I approached. "Mum, I need to talk to you." I fumbled with my keys. My hands were shaking again. "I'm tired, Trevor. Please, just 5 minutes." I let him in because I didn't have the energy to argue. He stood in the middle of my tiny apartment, looking around at the second-hand furniture, the worn carpet, the water stain on the ceiling that the landlord kept promising to fix. "You live here," he said. Not a question. An observation heavy with something I couldn't quite name. Yes. I didn't know. I thought you had a place on the east side, something nicer. I sold the condo for Caroline's treatments. He flinched. Randall said you had savings, that you were fine. Randall was wrong. Trevor sat down on the sofa without being invited. He looked older than I remembered. There were lines around his mouth, grey in his beard that hadn't been there at the funeral. "Mum, I need to tell you something." He pulled out a folder from his briefcase. "I've been going through my finances, trying to get them in order after the bankruptcy, and I realized something." He handed me the folder. Inside were statements, records of loans, money he'd borrowed from me over the years. 5,000 for the business startup, 3,000 when his daughter needed braces, 2,000 for the roof repair on his house, $15,000 total, with interest, nearly 22,000. "Paid you back," he said, "for any of it. You never asked, so I just forgot, or pretended to forget. I looked at the papers, at my own signatures on the loan agreements we'd drawn up at my kitchen table, back when I still had a kitchen table. And there's this. He pulled out another document. The life insurance policy on Caroline, the one you took out when she was born. You named me and Randall as beneficiaries. When she died, we each got $100,000. My breath caught. I used mine to pay off my business debts, Trevor continued. Randall used his for a down payment on his second home, the ski lodge in Aspen. I didn't know Caroline had a policy, I whispered, because you signed it over to us when she turned 18. You said you wanted to make sure we'd be okay if anything happened to her. You never thought about yourself. He stood up, walked to the window, looked out over the alley. Randall convinced me that Aunt Marlene's will was legitimate, that she'd wanted us to have the estate. But I've been doing the math, Mom, adding it all up. Everything you gave us, everything you sacrificed. He turned back to me. I'm not going to fight you anymore. I'm withdrawing from the lawsuit, and I'm going to pay you back every cent I owe you, with interest. I couldn't speak. I know it doesn't fix anything, he said. I know I can't undo the last few years of being a terrible son. But I want you to know I see you now. I see what you gave up for us, what you're still giving up. He left then, quietly, leaving the folder on my coffee table. I sat there for a long time. After he was gone, looking at the papers, doing the math. $22,000 from Trevor. If I got it, it would pay for the legal fight. It would keep me going until the estate was settled. If I got it. If Trevor actually followed through. If he wasn't just saying what he thought I wanted to hear. But something in his face had seemed genuine. Something broken and ashamed and trying maybe to find its way back to something like decency. That night I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because Trevor's promise had solved everything. Not because the legal fight was over or Randall had suddenly seen reason, but because, for the first time in a long time, one of my children had looked at me and seen a person, not a function, not a convenience, a human being with needs and feelings and a right to dignity. It was a small thing. Maybe it wouldn't last. Maybe Trevor would change his mind tomorrow, go back to Randall's side, forget his promises the way he'd forgotten the loans. But tonight, in this moment, someone had seen me, and that was enough. I made a list the next morning. Everything I needed to do, everything I needed to prove, everything I needed to gather for the legal case. Medical records showing Marlene's competence, testimony from Claire and the other neighbours, the journals I'd already copied, letters and cards and every scrap of evidence that showed my sister's clear mind and clear wishes. I would fight, not with anger, not with vengeance, but with the quiet, steady determination of someone who had finally decided she was worth fighting for. The hearing came on a cold morning in November, 6 months after Marlene's death. 6 months of depositions and document requests and expert testimony. 6 months of Marcus Webb's phone calls and legal motions and attempts to drag out the process until I couldn't afford to continue. But I had continued. Trevor had been true to his word. The first payment had arrived 3 weeks after our conversation, $5,000 with a note. That simply said, "More coming. I'm sorry." It had been enough to keep Attorney Bernard working, to keep the case moving forward. Now we sat in the courtroom, waiting for the judge to make her ruling. Randall was there with Webb. Trevor sat on my side of the room, not quite next to me, but not with his brother either. A visible division that had cost him, I knew. His wife had stopped speaking to him. Randall hadn't returned his calls in months, but he'd shown up. Judge Patricia Morrison entered, and we all stood. She was younger than I'd, spected, maybe 50, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "Please be seated." She settled into her chair, adjusted her glasses, and looked at the documents spread before her. "This is the matter of the estate of Marlene Davies, contested by her nephews Randall Brennan and Trevor Brennan on grounds that the decedent was mentally incompetent at the time she executed a mutual will with her sister, May Hayes." She looked up, directly at me, then at Randall. "I've reviewed all the evidence submitted by both parties, medical records, expert testimony, witness statements, the mutual will itself dated May 14, 2008, and the subsequent will dated August 2023. My heart was pounding. The flutter was back, worse than ever. "I've also reviewed Mrs. Davies' journals, which were submitted by Mrs. Hayes. Particularly illuminating were the entries from the final 2 years of Mrs. Davies' life, showing clear cognition, rational thought, and explicit statements about her wishes regarding her estate." Judge Morrison picked up one of the journals. "I want to read something into the record from an entry dated June 18, 2023, approximately 3 months before Mrs. Davies passed away." She read Marlene's words in a clear, steady voice. "The passage about the roses, about May deserving the house, about Randall and Trevor not even wanting it, just wanting the money." The courtroom was silent. "The evidence before me shows that Marlene Davies was mentally competent in 2008 when she executed the mutual will. It further shows that she remained mentally competent throughout her life, including in her final months. The subsequent will, presented by the petitioners, dated August 2023, was purportedly signed at a time when medical records show Mrs. Davies had extremely limited motor function and was on medications that would have made voluntary signature highly unlikely." Judge Morrison looked at Randall. Mr. Webb, your handwriting expert, testified that the signature on the August 2023 will was consistent with your aunt's hand. But Dr. Fisher, the medical expert called by Mrs. Hayes, testified that given your aunt's condition at that time, she would have been physically incapable of producing such a signature without assistance. Your Honour, Webb stood. We maintain that. Sit down, Mr. Webb. The judge's voice was sharp. I'm not finished. He sat.
I find that the mutual will executed in 2008 remains valid and binding. I find that the August 2023 will was not properly executed and is therefore void.
I hereby rule that the entire estate of Marlene Davies passes to May Hayes in accordance with the terms of the mutual will. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table, Attorney Bernard's hand on my shoulder, steadying me. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, given the evidence suggesting potential forgery in the creation of the August 2023 will, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation. Mr. Brennan, she looked at Randall, you may wish to consult with your attorney about your exposure here. Randall had gone white. This matter is concluded. Mrs. Hayes, the estate is yours. Mr. Bernard will work with the executor to transfer all assets to you within 30 days. She stood. Court is adjourned. I couldn't move, couldn't process what had just happened. The estate was mine, the house, the accounts, everything Marlene had wanted me to have, everything we'd promised each other. That day in Samuel Chen's office 15 years ago, Attorney Bernard helped me stand, walked me out of the courtroom while behind us Webb was already talking to Randall in urgent, hushed tones. Trevor caught up with us in the hallway. Mom? His voice was thick. I'm glad. I'm really glad. I looked at him. This son who'd found his way back, slowly, painfully, who'd chosen to see me when it would have been easier not to. Thank you, I said, for being here. He nodded, started to say something else, stopped. I know it doesn't fix everything, but I want to try, to be better, if you'll let me. I will, I said, because what else was there to say? He left, and Attorney Bernard and I stood in the courthouse hallway while people streamed past us, strangers with their own legal battles, their own fights for dignity. What happens now? I asked. Now, he said, you go home, to your home, Marlene's house. You pack up that efficiency apartment and you move back into the life you should have had all along. I moved into Marlene's house on a Saturday in December. Claire and her husband helped me, carrying my few boxes up the porch steps while cardinals sang in the bird bath and the roses, dormant for winter, waited for spring. The house smelled like Marlene, lavender and old books and something indefinable that was just hers. I walked through the rooms slowly, touching things, the kitchen counter where we'd made jam, the living room where we'd watched movies, the guest room that had been mine after Robert died. My room now, my house now, but hers too, always hers too. I found her reading glasses on the bedside table, next to the mystery novel she'd never finished. I left them there. They belonged. The legal matters took time to settle, transferring accounts, changing deeds, working with the attorney to establish a trust for Claire's youngest daughter, who wanted to study horticulture and had shown such love for Marlene's garden. $100,000 in trust to be released when she graduated. Enough to start her life without debt, without the weight I'd carried. Trevor visited once a month. Sometimes we had lunch. Sometimes we just walked in the garden. The conversation was stilted at first, both of us feeling our way toward something that looked like a real relationship. But it was. Something, a beginning. I drew up my own will with attorney Bernard's help. Simple and clear. The house to Claire's daughter, the remainder of the estate split between Trevor and a local charity that helped elderly women with housing, and a no contest clause. Anyone who challenged the will would be immediately disinherited. I learned that from Randall. He didn't visit, didn't call. The district attorney had decided not to pursue charges. Insufficient evidence, they said, though everyone knew what had happened. But the law firm where he'd been partner had quietly suggested he retire early. The whispers about forged documents and contested wills had damaged his reputation in ways that wouldn't heal. I didn't take pleasure in it, but I didn't grieve for him either. He'd made his choices, now he lived with them. On Christmas Eve, I sat on Marlene's porch with Claire and her family. We drank hot cider and watched much memoirs, the snowfall, light and gentle, covering the dormant garden. Claire's daughter Emma asked about the roses when they'd bloom, what colours they were. I told her about the pink ones Marlene had planted for her mother, the red ones I'd planted for Robert, the yellow ones we'd planted together just because we liked yellow. "I'll teach you to care for them in the spring," I said, "if you'd like." Her face lit up. Really? Really? Later, after they'd gone home, I sat alone in the quiet house. The Christmas tree lights twinkled, the fire crackled. Outside, the snow continued to fall. I thought about Marlene, about our promise to each other, about how she'd kept her part of it, even in death, even when it would have been easier to give in to Randall's pressure. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, small, invisible, apologizing for taking up space. And the woman I was now, still alone, still grieving, but visible, present, worthy of dignity. The house was quiet around me, not the empty quiet of loneliness, but the peaceful quiet of a space that was mine, that I'd chosen, that I'd fought for. I picked up my phone and did something I'd been thinking about for weeks. I called the women's shelter where I'd volunteered before Robert got sick. asked if they still needed help with their housing advocacy program. They did. "I can start after the new year," I said. "I have some experience now with legal matters, with fighting for what's right." They were grateful, eager. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. The next morning, I found an envelope slipped under my door. No return address. Inside was a card with a simple message in handwriting I recognized as Trevor's. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Merry Christmas." I put it on the mantel next to Marlene's photo. Small gestures, tentative bridges. Maybe they'd hold, maybe they wouldn't. But I knew this now. My worth didn't depend on whether my children saw it. My dignity didn't require their approval. I'd fought for myself. I'd won. And that was enough. On New Year's Eve, I stood in Marlene's garden, my garden now, and watched the sun set behind the bare trees. The air was cold and sharp. The ground was frozen. Everything waited for spring. I thought about the year ahead, the roses I'd tend, the women I'd help, the small ordinary life I'd built from the ruins of the old one. Not a grand life, not a perfect one, but mine. And that, I'd learned, was all I'd ever needed. The house stood solid behind me, warm light glowing in the windows. Inside waited my tea and my books and my quiet space where no one demanded anything I wasn't willing to give. I'd spent 70 years learning this lesson. Silence is not kindness when it costs you dignity. Setting boundaries, even late, even with family, is not cruelty. It's survival. It's self-respect. It's the difference between existing and living. I went inside as the stars came out, one by one, and closed the door behind me, not shutting anyone out, just choosing who I let in.